The power of the media is reflected in its nickname, the Fourth Estate, sharing the same influence as the three branches of government. But unlike the three, media is self-regulating. Ironically, that may be where the greatest threat to media freedom resides, in its own independence. During elections, media not only provides us with the information we need, it may also shape the public agenda, which in turn can swing the vote. Insofar as media serves as election watchdog, it is itself being watched for its objectivity, its impartiality.
A lot of people, a lot of programs nowadays, they have agendas, they have platforms that they're able to give, in the service of one candidate or another. And we want to avoid that. We want to make sure that everyone gets a fair shot at it and that no one gets, preferential treatment in one program to the detriment of others.
Traditional media has ceded some ground to the advent of new media, with the internet as alternative battleground for candidates.
Every time elections happen, mas lumalakas yung demand. For one, their politicians kasi are not much different from brands. Talagang brand din sila, pero tao lang. And they have specific needs also for marketing. And because politicians have smaller teams to work with, smaller manpower, yung expertise in creating mga marketing collaterals or marketing web properties, medyo limited din. So they normally talk to agencies like us or other mga smaller companies as well, that do digital marketing.
Websites, Twitter and Facebook accounts are abuzz. Political hecklers abound, making the discourse more fluid and free. But whether the number of friends and followers translates to actual votes is an entirely different matter. According to US-based research firm Gallup, only 1 in 5 Filipinos has constant internet access. Whatever the future holds, the transformative effects of old and new media will continue to affect the nation. Therefore, a more reflective, balanced, and responsible media is needed more than ever. The 2013 midterm polls are shaping up to be an exciting one. I'm Nancy Irlanda, and this is Elections 2013. Media does not only provide us with the information we need, but as importantly, it shapes who we are and what we desire. Tonight, we will talk about the power, roles, and responsibilities of mass media in politics, particularly in the upcoming midterm elections. Joining us tonight, Managing Director for digital marketing expert Carlo Ople. With us also a war journalist and currently the multimedia director of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, or PCIJ, Ed Lingao. And the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, or CMFR's Executive Director, Melinda Quintos de Jesus. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And first off, let's make sure we assure the audience we didn't plan our wardrobes.
Yep.
Okay, all right. We're not talking about the death of media here, all right? We're just going to talk about what is this potent power, Melinda, that is traditionally attributed to the media, and how can media truly influence politics and elections?
Well, media is the source and provider of information, of news, and because we presume ourselves to be interested in news and in gaining as much information as we can, then we know that people turn to media in periods of election, in periods of crisis, in periods of disaster. And so we expect that the audience will turn more and more to media in the campaign period and as we approach the elections. Unfortunately, however, I think that power gets somewhat diffused because of the richness of media. I mean, there are just so many choices. And you can no longer rely on just one message coming through, or a dominant message coming through, or one dominant story going through. There are just going to be so many stories, and it all depends on how candidates handle their media projection as to how they can use media for their purposes of gaining more and more voters.
All right, and the flip side to that, Ed, do you think politicians and the elections influence media?
In a lot of ways, they do. One major influence of politicians on media is the fact that election year is always one of the richest years for media in terms of profits, because that's when the advertising rolls in. television, for example, in primetime TV, now they sell ad spots on primetime for what, 400,000 per 30-second spot. So a 1-minuter could earn the station 800 to 900,000 pesos.
All right. How do you assess the current state of coverage by the media of the elections? How are we doing so far? On a
Right.
scale of 1 to 10, to simplify it.
Right now, I don't think media is doing anything terribly exciting about getting more voters to be truly excited about the prospect of choosing a candidate. I don't think it's taken that
Why
track.
is that? Where is it?
Because people are not innovative
that.
enough, I think, for the times in which we live. I mean, I think you really basically have to grab attention.
How do we do that?
Well, let's ask some of the people who are involved in
right.
these campaigns, actually.
Well, it depends, no. Just to add to that, no. If you take a look at the format of the different, sabihin natin, shows when you talk about the candidates, even the format is a bit weird. Parang you ask a question, the journalist asks a question to the candidate, because the candidate is given 30 seconds to reply to an issue. So parang nasa-sensationalize na in a way. That way, no. So if you take a look naman at the different forms of media available, of course, digital is or new media, as a lot of people call it, such a disruptive and new medium. And it's exciting because, well, some politicians are already starting to engage. Siguro most of them are already on a very shallow level right now, but there's still a lot of things that you can do with digital that a lot of politicians aren't exploring at
All right,
the moment.
compared to the elections of 2010, are politicians maximizing the use of social media compared to then?
No,
There's a
still
long
not.
way to go.
Still a long way to go. More politicians
so?
are using it, but not necessarily maximizing it. It's still a race of who has the most likes on Facebook or who has the most number of followers on Twitter. But the big question is, let's say you have 1 million likes on Facebook. How many of those 1 million will actually vote? That's
That
the
is
big
the question.
question.
Is the number of likes, the number of followers, the number of friends actually translatable to actual votes?
Apparently not. It's not convertible automatically because pressing the buttons is so easy. And
Yeah.
a lot of people just like on Facebook without even bothering to read what's really there. They just see the picture, or they just see the title, and that's it. They like. They do
Given
not read.
that, is the power of social media or new media then sort of overblown?
The power of social media isn't maximized because the politicians and the strategists of the politicians aren't thinking
not.
straight or aren't maximizing the power of social
Okay, and if
media.
they were thinking straight, what would they be
It
doing?
would be all about engagement. It would be all about cultivating a spirit of voluntarism online and translating it to real life.
All right.
It's not necessarily reach and awareness. It's more of engagement, loyalty, and activation.
Of the person actually buying into it and
Yes,
taking action.
And taking action, whether either voting or encouraging a friend or two to vote. For example, I'd rather have a Facebook page of 100,000 loyal followers who will tell 1 or 2 of their friends to vote for me if I were a politician, than have 2 million likes on Facebook and none of them will vote. It
None
makes
of them
more sense.
will be convertible
Yeah.
to votes. And then taking that further, taking action, do you think that online fundraising is anywhere
Here in the
future?
Philippines?
Yes.
No, definitely not. Number one, the way to be able to give
They
that
do
money,
that in the US, yeah.
credit card is penetration
It's
here
just
is
not
very
here.
low.
Yeah.
You're talking fundraising here, especially if you take a look at the demographic of the Philippines, it's still a big skew towards the difference, the gap between the rich and the poor is still big. So fundraising here is you go to a businessman, you ask for money.
All right, Carla talked about the 30-second soundbite. Clearly, politicians will talk about what suits them. But on the other side, the person they're talking to, the journalist, do you think they're doing their jobs in asking the questions that the audience wants asked?
I don't think journalists are that much in touch with the public audience. I really do. I think journalists are just as much cut off from what audiences' concerns are as politicians are generally cut off from audience concerns.
All right,
There
pressure.
is a disconnect.
Pressure.
As,
Okay.
as much as there is media, there is, however, I think a disconnect from the stuff of media, from the stuff of life that really bears down on the citizens of this country.
Well, we really sound like we have a long way to go. How do we
But
address
to be
that?
fair, I think there have also been some improvements. Not as much as we'd like, but there have been some improvements in the way we cover the
I
elections.
was going to ask you, you've covered so many elections. Are we getting better or
Make
worse?
it sound so making it sound
No,
so
we-
old. But
Never mind,
more
I'm
than a
the
decade
oldest.
ago, a lot of the election coverage we would see would be, the reporter doing a live in the precinct and talking about so-and-so candidate got 3 votes versus so-and-so candidate got 5 votes. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just presence of the
Okay.
reporter there.
What do you want to see?
In 2010, for example,
Yes.
and this is where I think there's been some improvement, media started talking about other things like campaign finance.
Context.
How much candidates spend, who the donors are, where does the money go, do they follow election laws, and that's carried over to 2013. So that to me is a significant improvement, not as much as we'd like, but we seem to be moving kahit paano forward a bit.
All right, the Comelec imposing that 120 hours. Good or
Minutes.
bad? Minutes, I'm sorry, wow.
They'd be
Yeah.
happy with that, you know.
I just made a lot of people happy if what I said was true, right?
You made the stations happy too.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think of that? Is it a good or bad move?
There are several ways of looking at it. For the people who cannot afford, obviously the candidates who cannot afford to buy so much airtime, that's really a good thing. For those who can afford, of course, it cuts back on a lot of things. But you might look at it. You might also want to look at it as a great equalizer, and that's also where new media, I suppose, comes in. New media is a lot cheaper than.
Yes, it's more efficient.
Right, they turn to you.
Yeah, and
for
it's
that.
it's a good thing that they impose the limit. Speaking as a digital marketing practitioner, because their money they give it to us now. So yay.
All right,
But the equalizing thing, I think we should look at it also from the other end. It's an equalizing of non-information. How much information can you give about a candidate in 120 minutes?
that's also true.
That is dispersed through a period of what? About 3 months? There is no holding power for any of those messages actually, unless somebody has actually gotten so clever at formulating something that will resonate with the people. And I haven't seen that yet. Everything that you've seen so far has been old stuff in terms of
Generic.
campaigning. It's all generic. Somebody trying to look good. And the credibility of all that, media has not been able to actually even probe into,
And verify.
is it a believable message? Is it credible? Can I believe this person? Do I like his dating? I don't think we're thinking about that.
you raised a very important point about credibility. Does the public trust the media when it comes to reporting? Let's say in our particular, do they trust us? Particularly about the elections. I mean, how much trust is there that the public puts in the media?
Well, I'd like to think, especially, not just in urban, but more in rural areas, it's still a bit high because it's their main connection to the national, to the Philippines. It's their viewpoint into national politics. So I'd like to think that, yes, it's still very relevant, it's still very credible.
All right, social media in a national campaign, that's one thing. But how do you hone in laser-like a social media campaign in the local setting? Yeah.
Well, the good thing is technology's already caught up. There are targeting tools that you can use so that either your advertising or your message only appears in a particular locality, city. You can't go down barangay level, but you can go down, for example, only people in Cebu will see my ad. So you can actually do that.
Okay.
So it's already advancing at a very, very fast rate.
You can filter and limit.
Yeah, maybe, who knows, in 2016 you can target barangays.
Who knows? All right, we're going to talk more about that, but for now, we're going to go to a break. More issues about media and politics. Stay tuned. You're watching Elections 2013. Welcome back. You're still watching Elections 2013. All right, media is often accused of being biased. There are different forms of bias. It could come in the form of gatekeeping, coverage, and statements. Statements meaning editorializing. So let me ask the three of you very briefly. Is there truly such a thing as objectivity in the media, or is that just a myth? Belinda?
If you look at journalistic conventions, there's already a bias there because you have to look at prominence, you have to look at personality, you have to look at face. Therefore, there are only certain kinds of models that are really attractive to media, or that the gatekeepers will say, oh, the public will be interested in this. It's people who are because they are journalists and because they go by these old conventions, are actually looking for only certain types of politicians. Those who have already become prominent hold that advantage because, well, they've been newsmakers for so long. They're going to be they're going to head the race in that sense.
Or for local coverage proximity,
Correct.
because they're from that same area. Ed, objectivity, is that a myth?
We try to be objective, but you cannot really be objective because the mere fact that you chose to cover a certain story, you chose to interview somebody, is already a selection. It's already a bias in favor of talking to this person and covering this event. So I'd say that what's more important would be fairness
Okay.
and an attempt at objectivity, but not objectivity itself.
In a newscast, for example, a 30-minute newscast, the fact that you include certain stories in the lineup is already...
The fact that you lined it up means that to you, this is more
you
important than
filtered,
this.
Right. And in that sense, it becomes subjective. So there is no actual true peg of objectivity in that sense, right?
Which is why fairness is, to me, more important than objectivity itself. Because fairness means that you balance things and you figure out which one really deserves to be on top and which one does not.
All right. Carlo, how do you think, if we take a case study of what's happening now among politicians, say in the senatorial race, some of them are really, they started out maybe in the top 3. Now they're like struggling around number 12. What can they do in order to jumpstart their social media campaigns, you know, to get back into those ratings?
Well, the problem with social media is you should start it early. So that's
Okay.
one thing. The reason being, if coming from what I said earlier, that it's about engagement, activation, and that spirit of volunteerism, when you hit the actual campaign period, it should be about activating your people than building awareness. There's a difference. At this point in the game, 60 days away, you can only go as far as trying to get your message across using the digital channel, and you won't actually be taking that route of engaging people, getting them to volunteer, getting them to sign up, getting them to do things, because you'll be pressed to just get your message out. So if at this late in the game you haven't already started, the best you can do is really just raise awareness.
All right, if we were to have you, Carlo Ople, manage like a candidate from the start, how would his campaign look on social media?
Oh, I'd do it
How early on?
at least 6-7 months before the
Okay.
actual campaign period. What I would suggest is that you would really drive up more of registrations, asking people to volunteer, build a big database, dissect that database into different areas so you know where your volunteers are. Come election time, activate everybody. Get them to spread the word, to get their friends to vote, etc., etc.
And right now, you don't see this happening.
There are some
Jesus
candidates who
Cudero
are
always
trying.
says that. I mean, he's you know shifted his whole battlefield to
He
social
always
media.
says, but I haven't really seen it.
All right.
You know, into the last year, he tried. He came out with a few videos, but that's a bit. Again, a lot of politicians' take on digital is very, very shallow. The moment they think that they're just on Facebook and they're on Twitter and they're on YouTube, they're already digital. In a way, yeah, they're digital, but they're not maximizing.
They're
the
scratching
space.
the surface.
Yeah.
Right, Ed, media as an elections watchdog. How far along are we fulfilling that role?
Again, it needs a lot of improvement. Being watchdog means that you know, first of all, what the rules are. A lot of reporters still don't know what the rules are when it comes to elections. We know this because we've been doing, for example, a lot of election training for reporters in Metro Manila and in the provinces, and there are still some very basic election rules that a lot of reporters don't know about. So doon pa lang may problema na tayo. And how can you watch? How can you watch the candidates and what they do and what the parties do if you don't even know how the rules go? So that I guess is the start.
Okay, well, 101 for the newsrooms. What's the first thing that newsrooms should do?
They should
Literally go through seminars.
Yeah, literally.
Yes.
Yeah,
Long
they should.
before the election season comes in, hindi ka maghahabol ng last month before the election or 2 months before the election saka magsiseminar. Hindi eh. You get election lawyers to talk about all the basics talaga. Anong bawal, anong hindi, how the candidates get around the election laws, especially the loopholes. Kasi dun sa loopholes nagkakalokohan eh. And and that's what, if reporters know that and the editors also know that, then they know what to look for and they know where to hit them where it hurts.
All right, payola or envelopmental journalism. I mean, that's always been something that the media has been criticized for. Social media, is that a factor?
Well, if it's in the current state of media, then it's not
Someone paid to
far-fetched
blog on
to
behalf
be
of
on social
someone?
media. Yeah, it happens. And the thing is, unlike journalists, a lot of bloggers and people on social media don't adhere to specific, ethics. And you can't really blame a lot of them because not all of them get paid to write or get paid to blog. So if it's the only thing they're doing and somebody offers them something, most of the time a fair number of them will really accept it and try to come up with something for that particular candidate. It happens. It definitely happens.
Okay, am I asking the obvious, or how rampant is it, Melinda?
We hear that
Still.
it is quite rampant in both mainstream media as well as the new media. What happens in mainstream is generally mirrored in the new
Yeah.
media as well, because the culture is the same. And the corruptors are there. So the corruptors will do what they can to play the games with whatever is playing out there. And the reports that we've been hearing now is basically institutional sales of programs. Basically the radio stations and whatever, maybe even newspapers, may have already been hooked on to the, who's going to be covered more than this or that or the other. I know that there have been sign-ons on covenants that they will not receive, but these are signed on to by owners, not those who are actually on the ground, where the payoffs are happening. But in addition to that individual corruption or bribery or incentives, it's really the notion that you can say, a radio station can say, okay, we've got contracts with such and such and such a candidate. I mean, this is already a subject of a book that has been put out by PCIJ and the partners of PCIJ, News for Sale. Basically, they're saying, okay, if you paid us this much, then you will get slots. And if you're going through visit our affiliates, then our affiliates will also give you the time that you
All
want.
right, Ed, Melinda's talking about transactional journalism, obviously. Your take.
There are several levels of corruption. Take note, hindi lang yung mga reporters yung problemado dyan na tumatanggap. Kasi yung reporter, pag tumanggap yan, usually barya lang yan kumpara mo dun sa mga producer, editor, news manager, at may-ari. Sa may-ari na nga lang maraming may-ari ng istasyon ng radyo, television at dyaryo, tumataya. That in itself is also an ethical problem.
Yeah, you bring up another interesting point. It's media ownership that's also a problem.
Yeah,
Because big business.
Especially pag presidential elections, maraming tumataya na may-ari. And even if there's no money getting exchanged, there's a lot of goodwill getting exchanged. And that in a lot of senses is of bigger value to these owners than the money going around. And I'll give you another example. Before the 2007 elections, I was a news manager for another station. Somebody brought me out to dinner and said that if you help me with this candidate, just give me your bank account and kami bahala sa'yo. Ganun kagarapal.
Ganun ka rin ka-principal.
Sabi ko, hindi pwede, ganun. Sabi niya, hindi ko na maibabalik to kasi nailabas na. Sabi ko, whatever you do with that, that's your problem. I cannot touch that. I cannot accept it. That's something that happens all the time.
It's a matter of fact. Safe to say that's the norm. More the rule than the exception. Are you willing to go that
on several
far?
levels. Iba-iba ring degrees yan on several levels. And yeah, meron ding institutional problem minsan yung sa ethics. You have some stations that sell what do you call that? Yung mga conceptualized segments na it looks like news, but it's not really news because it's more of PR for a certain personality or a certain product. You can do that for a product, you can do that for a politician. It looks like news, but it's not. It's
And
a
if
feature.
you don't pay, you're not part of it.
Yeah, the advertorial.
Advertorial.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
So hindi lang yung mga reporter yung problema. It goes all the way up din eh. So if you want to change things, you have to change things from top to bottom. Otherwise, the people in the bottom will say, bakit siya mas malaking kinikita niya, siya na nga may-ari.
All right, much has been said about this whole the magic of social media in campaigns. But are you willing to say that there's already been a tidal shift towards social media, or traditional media is still really holding its ground, and the audience turns more
In
to
the
traditional
Philippines,
media?
the traditional media is still holding its ground. Definitely. I mean, radio is still probably the best, the reach of radio to the masses and to the ordinary people. The penetration of internet is still that
One in
weak.
five
It is
Filipinos.
quite weak. It is the young people that it
constant.
generally has. And so we have to ask how many of these young people who are so active in the social media, how many of them are actually going to act as electors, as voters? And that's a question I think that very few people can actually answer now. I don't know who's studying this. I think it should be studied because the elections have to have meaning for the young people, or it doesn't have meaning at all.
Well, we're always talking about the importance of the youth vote, and social media speaks straight to the youth, right?
Well, if you talk about internet users in the Philippines, bulk of them are 18 to 24 years old. But again, to answer that question, the real question you have to answer is how many of them will actually vote. But just to add to that point on the relevance of social media and traditional, I think you have to take a look at it more that it's a complementary relationship than a one or the other. The thing with social media and TV is that the barrier between them has totally collapsed. For example, something explodes on social media, an issue. Just give it a few minutes, hours, traditional media will pick it up, it's on the news. And that's a very, very big shift in the way you manage your PR for politicians. Because suddenly, you just cannot just monitor radio, TV, and whatever.
Because they're feeding off each other.
Yeah, you have to take a look at what happens on Twitter, what people are talking about you on Facebook, because you never know, in the next hour, it could be on an hourly newscast. So that's one very important thing that you have to take a look at.
Is that right? That's right, Ed, right? Social media fuels programming at the TV stations, but TV stations are looking at what's happening in social media as well, right? Now, this whole role of the media as educator, I mean, is that our role?
Is it taking place?
Is that taking place? Is that our role? Yeah,
in a way it is. But media also has to keep in mind all the time that, yes, sometimes we are teachers, but more often than not, we should be students. And we should be learning before we start teaching. And that, I think, is something that's always forgotten, whether it's election time or not. No, we just can't keep on. And you have a lot of reporters and anchors who just do the talking and never do the reading.
right.
So what can they teach? It's a learning cycle. I mean, and that's why we say, journalists have to continue to learn.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the best things about journalism is that you never stop learning. You really can continue to open your minds to all kinds of new subjects. But whether they do this, it's a question. Whether the career path actually allows them to go back to the newsroom as a classroom, and whether editors run their newsrooms as classrooms, is a challenge, I think, to the media in the Philippines, given that we have so many young people. Demographically, we are young. And we keep talking about it as a benefit. Well, we have to make that a benefit if we educate our young. If they don't get educated, then let's forget the promise of the future.
All right, we're going to leave our discussion at that for now. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thanks to our guests, digital marketing expert Carlo Ople, war journalist and multimedia director of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, or PCIJ, Ed Lingao, and executive director of the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, or CMFR, Melinda Quintos de Jesus. Thank you, all of you, for joining us tonight. Tune in again next week as we make this vote count. I'm Nancy Irlanda, and this is Elections 2013.